When it rains, it pours for Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush has a lot of advantages running for president: a well-known name, a network of wildly successful fundraisers who are planning on raising more money for him than any presidential candidate in the history of the world. But there are some drawbacks. Jeb Bush has had a horrible week in dealing with questions related to his brother's track record. So when asked by Megyn Kelly on Fox, knowing what we know now, would you have gotten into the Iraq War? He said yes. Then he claimed he didn't understand the question. He meant if he could go back in time and knowing what was known then, he might still do the same thing. Then he said he can't respond to hypotheticals, which to me is just a bizarre thing for a presidential candidate. Presidential campaigns are about the future. Well, the future is hypothetical. There's numerous hypothetical scenarios for the future that presidential candidates have to deal with. Presumably, if someone said, if the Democrats propose a huge tax increase on the wealthy, hypothetically, would you sign that into law? He'd say, well, no, I'd veto it. That's dealing with a hypothetical. So then he also gave the excuse of, I can't talk about the future because that would somehow demean the soldiers who lost their life, hiding behind soldiers' families, which struck a lot of people as a very craven act. Then finally he said, okay, if I got to deal with hypotheticals, okay, I wouldn't have gone to Iraq knowing what we know now. Almost as if he were, had a gun to his head. So all of that, I would say, well deserved for him getting negative publicity. Well, here's the part that's interesting now. Completely unrelated to that, someone was asking him a question and he started talking about technology, the future, healthcare. He showed, I guess, what is an iPhone or iWatch that he has, an Apple Watch, and he started saying things that are completely sensible about how the sensors 5 years from now in an Apple Watch would detect your sugar levels and would allow people to have just tremendous levels of healthcare beyond anything we're thinking of right now. Everything I've ever read about wearable technology suggests that what he says is 100% true, not particularly controversial at all. And yet he's received massive publicity condemning him, saying, he thinks fancy watches are going to solve our healthcare problems and therefore nobody needs health insurance or Obamacare. That's not what he said, folks. Now, I've linked in the blog post on this same topic his clip. You can decide for yourself. So again, here's what's happening to Jeb Bush. He's got a whole string of negative interviews where he's done basic blunders. Now he's doing one, he doesn't do anything wrong, but people can't stop writing stories about how he's doing a bad job in interviews and saying awful things. So that's one of the problems. That's why every single interview counts. You've got to do your best. Now the interesting thing is his father had a similar problem with technology. Back in the early 90s, someone showed him a new type of, it wasn't just a scanner at a grocery store, it was a new type of scanner. President George Bush had commented that he'd never seen this before, and that was used as a hook to say he was so ignorant and out of touch that he'd never been to a grocery store. That wasn't the case at all. He was actually shown something new, and here it is, quarter of a century later, and similar things are happening to the sun. I don't know what any grand lesson there is other than if you're a candidate, do as well as you can in every interview, number one. Number two, be careful about talking about technology because you can be made to sound either stupid or naive.